you love the Unfiltered Rise and wish there was more? Well, now you're in luck. Head on over to Patreon and check out all our tiers for extra episodes, early drops, ad-free episodes, and more. And don't worry, Free Feed, we would never forget you. I love all my listeners. I'll never cut the episodes in half, and I'll never skimp on those as well. But if you want to support us, that's a great way to do it. And we have something in return for you. So come check us out. You won't be disappointed. Have a blessed day.
White rabbit. Oh, you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole.
Curiosity often leads to trouble.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
I'm awake. Are you? Let's go now to our new episode of the Unfiltered Rise with me, Heidi Love.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Rise. And today I'm lucky enough to have Drew from You're Missing the Point. How are you doing today, Drew?
I'm great, Heidi. How are you?
I'm great. I'm always love talking to you. It's always fun, and we get to talk to you and see what's up down under and like find out all the deets there too. But I know we're not doing anything about geography today, but it might have a different thing where you live. Like maybe you guys have some information we don't. I don't know. I'm interested because you were saying you were recently kind of going down the Nephilim path, and I'm always all about that. I've heard some really like wild things on this side. Like I did a big series with a lady that's pretty sure everyone is absolutely like Nephilim blood, like most of us. And I'm like, well, we could be. I'm more like, well, it might be, it could be. I'm more of like analytical about that. I don't just jump full into the, like it is. That is different for me. And then I've had people that are like, this is a story and that's all that is. And I'm like, oh, I don't think that. How do you feel about all that?
I've been in a pretty unique situation that, and I think the rest of the world doesn't see this because, you know, people see Australia and that's Vegemite sandwiches and crocodiles and that's all they really know. Australia has the oldest continuous culture ever recorded that's still alive. We've got a First Nations people that go back potentially longer than 65,000 years in this country. So it always baffles me that it's just the idea of we've grown up in it and I don't know any different, that we know about this culture. It's so old. It should probably garner a lot more international research than it does. We constantly hear about North American Indians. We hear about Slavic peoples in Europe. We hear about Indo-Europeans. We hear about people in Africa, people in Latin America, people in Central America. We hear about all this big, heavy research into ancient cultures that may only go back as far as, say, 5,000 to max 10,000 years, but our own culture goes back potentially up to 100,000 years, according to some scholars. But we'll go with the baseline that it is now of 65,000 years. It hasn't had the research that I think it warrants. And even from our own anthropologists, it's Aboriginal people were hunter-gatherers and their culture didn't really change over time because it didn't need to. And I don't think that's possible for a culture. I don't think it's possible for a culture to stagnate at a level and not improve. I don't think the human mind that works that way. I don't think that our imagination fosters that competing competition with other tribes. That would foster some kind of a leap in technology or even spiritual practices. And it's the history that we're told in Australia about our First Nations and that the rest of the world kind of knows, I don't think is quite on track to what it could be.
Wow, I did not know all of that. That's wild. I mean, I knew you had the Aboriginal tribes and that they were old, but I didn't know they were that old, you know, that they dated them that far back. That's actually wild. And I mean, there's got to be a component for all of these different things like, okay, the world's this old. No, it's this old. The people are this old. No, it's this. It's just constant confusion. And but like you said, like, okay, how come we've got all these studies on completely random things like Cheerios and something this important, right? Like, oh yeah, we're busy at the Cheerio factory. Don't come and bother us with your crazy stuff, like about actual population growth, tribes, what's happening, all these things. And they just skipped over that. I'm with you. It's odd. Why?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you mentioned at the start that when you said Nephilim, some people are either all in or it's just a story. I'm a person who doesn't throw science out with the baby with the bathwater type of a deal. I appreciate science. I think science, when it's used correctly, is perfect. It's the way that we prove our faith and we prove historical events and things that have happened that are mentioned. And it's the idea that we've got science there to back us up. But I don't think the Christian, or in a lot of cases, even the conspiracy or truth movement, use it to its full potential. There's a big event that, science is bad. Science tried to jab the world. Well, yes, bad science did that. But the scientific method, it works. If you can repeat something and prove it, that's just it. It's the closest thing you can get to provable truth.
Absolutely.
And if you're looking at a culture that's 65,000 years old, if that's the oldest recorded culture, there should be a lot of answers to a lot of our questions. Like, where did these people originally? Where did these people come from? There's a lot of evidence that suggests Aboriginal Australians actually came from southern India. If you look at tribes within southern India, they're indistinguishable from First Nations people here. So much so that there's tribes in Western Australia that have a Shiva dance. So if we're seeing a lot of those cross-cultural contaminations or where they originally came from, there's a potentiality that there's the very first indications of Nephilim or spiritual rulership over mankind within one of the first recorded cultures in history. And I think that's something that no one's willing to attempt to even scratch the surface on in Australia.
Exactly. Well, and I think in general, people don't want to focus on the fact that we may have been another culture's slave, like in general, for the nations, like everyone, not just a couple races here and there, humanity being cruel to humanity, but that we might have actually been created for a slavery purpose, possibly, right? Like to be minors. This
is the funny thing, though, right? You look at Ancient Aliens, and heaps of people jump on board with Ancient Aliens. Oh, and the aliens built the pyramids in Mesoamerica. They built the pyramids in Egypt, and they manipulated humans into what they're being. I think we've seen that shift now where the Christian community is definitely on board with the idea that the fallen ones kind of set themselves up as quasi-gods and went into their own little regions and ruled over their own little kingdoms with human beings. But when you get to the minutiae of smaller, air quotes, cultures that didn't achieve architecture to the scales of others, they think it's just spiritualism and there's nothing else to it. But you end up seeing a lot of parallels, and the parallels that are there are just mind-blowing when you start to talk to mob and people that are of country and find out their stories, not just from what the textbooks tell you.
Right. There's so many gods that are the same but different names. There's so many things that are the same but different story. Like, it's very similar. So why is that when, you have all these different books, like nobody questions, name some science book. Like it is the book in every country. It's translated the same. We all get it. But if it goes to biblical things or like anything that's kind of off the rails, they're like, no, that was just translated wrong. I'm like, well, what about all these other books you have? What about how come the Magus is still correct? And it's the Magus and always was Magus, and they don't, go back and forth on the Magus like they do the Bible, right? Or like they do anything else. And there's so many books. They took a ton of books out. And then on top of it, the books that we don't know about, because I am certain that there's a whole bunch of them in the Vatican. I'm like 100%.
There'd be an archive full of them for sure. Definitely. There's probably books in there written by the Nephilim themselves.
Yeah. Yep. I think so too. I think that it's all a grand scheme to definitely hide a lot of things. Like, and why? Like you said, okay, the alien agenda, they're going to, put that on full blast, front and center. Okay, we can do this, and that's hokey and weird, but we can't do this other thing or call them demons or call them rulers or call them fallen angels or whatever. As soon as you call them a different name, no way, didn't happen, right?
Exactly
But
right.
yeah, like,
And
and the flood is everywhere. Like, same thing, same story, all over. Like tribal people carving it on caves, you
yeah,
know?
it's a collective memory the entire human race has. So it tells you that it happened globally or
Right,
worldwide, if you want to go that
right,
way.
right.
It's I find it fascinating that people can think that it's just individual cultures that sprung up by themselves, yet they had the same collective ideas of what things could be. Now, if that's true, you'd have to go down the route of collective consciousness and we're all tapped into a primary source. But why can't the primary source for what science deems as, I don't know, universal consciousness or the one idea of source, how's that any different from what a creator God would be?
Right.
Or something masquerading as a god. If you're feeding the information to someone in multiple places and you're giving them the same information, of course the cultures will have similar aspects and the same story or the same template will be repeated over time.
Yeah, because I mean, they saw it, they were there, or they were told, and so I actually believe, in my weird conspiratorial mind, that that was one of the reasons why they tried to wipe out the Native Americans in America, because they wanted that oral tradition stopped. They couldn't stop it like they can a book. They couldn't burn it. They couldn't get rid of it. These people were wrecking their stuff. And it was all at the same time. Like, we got the World's Fairs going on. We got these orphan train babies coming. We've got all this weird stuff happening that everybody's like, we don't know. We don't know. We have no idea why. But then I'm like, okay, but maybe the Native Americans were ones that they couldn't necessarily catch and kill them all, put them all in institutions, do whatever they were doing with all the other people. And that was why there was such an annihilation of it. They knew.
Yeah, it's you see what happened within, say, any nation that was colonized by Europeans, what happened to the First Nations peoples. It's people just say, oh, that's colonialism, that's what bad white man did. But you look at precisely what they did, it's a lot of routing out of spiritualism and the esoteric knowledge of those peoples. You look at what happened with early Native Americans, when the Americans went out west. It was a lot of Masons. A lot of Masons went out and made contact with these people. Now, what's that idea for? Is it to actually steal the esoteric knowledge, things that they had that they didn't have? I almost look at it as it's not just one group of bad guys, air quotes. It's multiple little crime groups, and each group wants to get more power than the other. Well, these people have consolidated power in Europe. They've come to the Americas. They've consolidated their power there, and they're trying to learn from what the native esoteric people have so they can use it. Same thing happened in Australia. And particularly when you think about the way multiculturalism and multiracial coupling is presented, it's pushed really hard. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with multiracial couples. It's human beings. That's why, you love who you love, and that's just the way human beings are. But there's a big push for it. There's a reason behind that in the research I've done, is that blood actually holds power. Blood is a life force. Really. It holds the divine spark for us. It can also hold the power of Nephilim bloodlines. We see that within the royals. We see that with the elites. And we see that with...
Sorry.
That's okay. I've got a cat.
You can see my face, maybe, or your cat's going crazy.
Yeah, I've got a cat going crazy in the background as well at times. So
I had a dog going crazy too a minute ago. Sorry, honey. He's like, you want your check in the bank, you have to sign it, dummy. Bye, babe. No, he wouldn't say that. He's like this in the background. Oh, God. All right. Well, back to that. Yes,
let's take two. So there's power in these bloodlines. If we think that if what scripture tells us is true, we know that the fallen ones had children with human females. They interbred with mankind, which gave us men of renown. It gave us those demigods, the Hercules, all of these greater than other human beings that walked around and performed miracles, right? Now, we know the flood supposedly happened to wipe them out. My theory is that, and you see it through scripture, that the Nephilim simply became the Raphaim. So not all of them are wiped out. He couldn't...
It's impossible. The whole reason why the sons of God fell from the heavens when they came here to mate with women. Why was God even upset about that, right? Why? Because they don't need to mate with women. But why? because they don't need a progeny, right? But why? Because they're everlasting beings.
Exactly.
So do you really think water's going to take them out? We have thoughts that they used to live in Atlantis, possibly under the water. So I don't really think so.
Exactly.
I'm with you.
And
yeah.
So let's just say the flood wiped out majority of their children, of the Nephilim. But the angels still remain. The angels lingered. The ones that weren't physically trapped between, say, the Euphrates or trapped in stone, which you see in a lot of cultures, they were still allowed to linger. So they were allowed to spread out from the Holy Lands, and they were popping up little multiple cultures. So that's where we see Mesoamerican Indians, where we see India spring up. We see all these cultures that had multiple gods of all kinds of descriptions. They appeared. So we have the Raphaim. So these Raphaim, they're continuing their bloodlines through, say, royalty and other powerful people. So how do you either hijack the powers that are in the blood magic of these peoples or wipe them out? Well, you interbreed with them. So if you've got your bloodline, say, interbreeding with a very spiritually strong, say, Native American clan or a Aboriginal mob, by interbreeding with them, you're either diluting their blood magic or adding to your own. Or both. It could be these things. Australia had a white Australia policy, which was mostly about immigration, but we also had a policy in which First Nations people were actively trying to be bred out. So it was called the Stolen Generation. Not only were First Nations people taken away from their families, there was a goal of breeding them out. So each Aboriginal person would have to take an Anglo-Australian husband or wife. And over 3 or 4 generations, supposedly those people would be wiped out. That was a government policy. I think that was done for a reason. If you speak to a lot of clever fellas, which are like the shamans or spiritual leaders of mobs, and you get on a level with them where they can trust you as a white fella and tell you stories, the things that they can do and they can achieve are astounding. The ability to turn invisible, the ability to walk through worlds, which I would place to physics, stepping through multiple dimensions and transporting yourself. They can curse you. They can kill people from one side of the planet to the other. The powers that they have as this culture that's been untapped and untainted is it's insurmountable of what they could do. So I find it fascinating that Australia, for most of the world, was colonized last. We're a very young country. But the attack on First Nations culture happened very quickly. It's like they tried to get ahead of the curve and try to stop what they could.
Well, because they've done it before, right?
Yes, right. They mastered it in other countries. Yeah. They used firearms, they used disease, all the typical things of colonization, for good or bad, it happened. But then there's that spiritual element that history books won't talk about. It's the acquisition of knowledge, acquisition of power, and acquisition of blood. And that's definitely happened here.
Well, and blood is there, all of this comes with a price. And I mean, all this child sacrifice that we see, the Aztecs, all these weird things that have been going on, we're not talking about now. It still is occurring. I am certain of that. But why? Right. Because it all goes back to that is their currency. Their currency is not only blood, but blood of specific things. And it's not going to be animals for the most part, unless they can't find anything else. Okay, so we're talking humans. I've talked to multiple people that were even in the occult that said, like children's blood, if they're really innocent, a boy is first, all this different stuff, and it goes in line. This gets back to where their currency is, and it doesn't matter if you don't believe it, that's fine, but they believe it, and that's why we have a problem. Whether it's real or whether it's not, they're acting on these things. They're hurting people, taking people's kids, killing people. I mean, Epstein's Island was right next to the Bermuda Triangle. Do you know this? Yeah. And he built that big temple there, right? And so what the hell do they think he was doing? It wasn't just about sex. Come on.
No, I think sex is just the method to lure a few people in, but we know sex and blood magic kind of cross over.
They go together. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When you mentioned the idea of the blood of certain people, you look at what circumcision is. Now, I have a feeling that circumcision isn't a covenant with God that the Old Testament tells us it is. I think that was planted within the Old Testament because it's the blood of innocent young boys, right? And how do they stop that blood from letting? They sliced the foreskin off, and
Yeah.
they suck it out with their mouth. That seems quite blood magic and satanic to
Yeah.
me. The interesting thing is, there's a lot of mobs within Australia for First Nations who practice circumcision, and the British were fascinated when they arrived and they saw it happening. So clearly, this isn't some just Hebrew.
It's not
practice.
just Abrahamic. Yeah.
It's not Abrahamic.
Yeah.
It's got to come from something far older than that. Like, how did it get here? It's not like there's a whole heap of synagogues built around Australia.
Yeah, and then on top of it, that's what, if you find some of these really weird videos about like superstars and whatever, and I won't mention who, but there's a very famous video of someone talking about this, about how she keeps young and talking about foreskins. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like she said the quiet part out loud. And I posted the video because I'm like, this is gold. Like when everybody was going on about the gold juice, I'm like, this is old news. Like I know what this is. I know what this is. Blood. If you look at blood spun down, what rises to the top? The serum. What color is it? It's gold. Like, come on, people, and there's certain blood that they're looking for things, which brings me to the RH factor. It didn't even exist that we know of. Well, it existed, but they didn't have it coined until 1940. My great grandma had it, who was far older than that, having babies. There was nothing she could do. They didn't even know what was happening. This is why there's the joke that I'm Nephilim, because my grandma was O negative blood, which is part of the golden blood, which it's RH null is the best one, which they estimate only 50 people in the whole world have that one, like the real top of the top. But then how come there's such a precedence of this RH factor that comes to play? And guess who it shows up in? White people. Why? What color were the angels? What were they marked for? Why was Hitler trying to make everybody so damn white? Figure it out, people. This was not like his preference just because he thought it was cute. The angels were white. They came as bright white people. If you look at me and you are probably screwed, but whatever. It is what it is, right? We gave our hearts to God. But I mean, I have always heard that joke because I have these really hazel green eyes, and my grandma would always joke about it and blah blah. And I'm like, well, I didn't get that negative. At least I'm not RH factor, but but it makes you wonder, what is going on that this just popped up. Really, that's late in the game. 1940 is not very long ago.
No, and you look,
50% of the population is that now.
You look at where the Holy Land is situated. You take the Mediterranean, the Eastern Steppe, Western Europe. That's the traditional homeland of, air quotes, white people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if that's where the Holy Land was, the current demographics of the Middle East are newly formed peoples. They've come from other parts of the world and settled there. So the majority of people would have been at very least Mediterranean in appearance, that kind of Italian, Greek kind of slight tan, good enough to go out in the sun, that type of a deal, but essentially still European-esque white people. So it makes sense that those RH negative traits are stronger in those populations because that's where the angels would have landed and descended on Earth first. Now, the interesting thing about genetics is I may not be, let's just pretend I'm not RH negative, right? I may not have RH negative blood, but my DNA has the traits for it, so that I can pass that on, and just it could trigger in my progeny, right? So my understanding, and this is how I take it, is God and Satan, they're in a constant state of to and fro, a game of chess. Satan's trying to prevent all the moves that God already has planned out. He knew that God was going to send a son to Earth to save mankind. So what did he try to do? Corrupt the bloodlines. Try and corrupt God's greatest creation. He did that. God's reaction, flood it. Try and wipe the board clean. That didn't work. So Jesus was coming anyway. His savior was coming. But I think the savior was coming for a very particular sin. I think all of humanity has some percentage of fallen DNA. I don't think that could have been stopped. So not only did he die for our sin, he died for the sin of what man became.
I think it actually came with some of Noah's sons' wives.
Bloodlines.
Yes. And so we always talk about how Noah's DNA was perfect, and that's great. and they did keep that line, but like you have to look at all of it, right? You have to look at what about the wives. But I think back then the knowledge wasn't as strong in the female genetic play, right? We always hear, even go back to Crowley, like it's all about the male, it's all about the divine masculine, not the feminine, right? So we go back to this stuff, and you're like, okay, how come these certain things line up? And then like you said, okay, the natural type of person from that area is brown, brownish. And I always tell my daughter, like, Jesus is definitely brown, bro. Like, I mean, he's a spirit now and it doesn't even matter. But like when he came here to the world, he was brown, because I don't like her to see these pictures that are this blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus. And I'm like, I probably don't think so, because if he were, they would have mentioned it, because what happened with Moses? They put that all over the Bible, how white he was and how come, like they were very concerned. They were very concerned. And so I'm like, okay, well, how come that, or was that Noah? Moses? Noah? Which one was really white? Do you remember?
I believe it was supposed to be Noah.
Noah, very white. Yep, sorry, got that mixed up. So he wouldn't have blended well with the Egyptians. Sorry on that one. Okay.
See, this is the thing, though. I don't think a lot of these ancient cultures were as we see them today, though. I think Jesus, wouldn't say he was Aryan white, like he's depicted as one of.
I think he's like a brown.
Yeah. I think he was European, but darker European. Yeah. Even what you'd see is some of the ancient Persians. They were still very Caucasoid in appearance, just tanned up. They could tolerate the sun a bit more.
Like brown, yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't like you hear a lot of the Black Israelites, like everyone was African. I'm like,
I don't believe
that's a very strong genetic trait that doesn't breed out over successive generations.
And it pops
strong
up.
traits. Yeah, it does.
You
just
could be two white parents that have like that in their progeny, and you can have a fully Black baby later and go like, whoa. And my friend was actually Black, but he came out so white with like blue eyes, but his parents were both very like Black people, and it actually caused the divorce of his parents, because his dad was like, this white baby is not mine, like it's got blue eyes. And it was, and that's how genetics work. Like one day you just get, if you keep having enough of them, you're going to get something odd. And the thing, while I think that Jesus must have blended well, because in the Bible it says he was nothing to look at, he was the same as other men. So I'm like, okay, that tells you right there that he wasn't a Noah, where it says all over, oh my gosh, what happened to Noah? He's super weird and white. Like, what happened to him? And I'm assuming he was albino, like possibly because it was so stark. They made so many comments about it that I'm like, this couldn't have just been a blonde guy. Like, this had to be like a really absurd thing. Yeah.
And many cultures who are dark-skinned people, they revere albinism as some kind of magical power. Yeah. You mentioned that Jesus was a brown-skinned person. He was tanned. That's just the way he blended in with the current people of the time. It's interesting when you look at the demographics and the racial profiles of people of North Africa and the Middle East. The Moors. People instantly think of the Moors as being African in appearance, like North African, Sub-Saharan African appearance. They were actually Berbers.
They don't look that. Yeah, to me, they've got like freckles and they have different facial features.
And that comes from the Berbers. The Berbers were white, red-haired Muslims. You see that in the steppe in China, the mummies that they found in the pyramids of China. They are redheads. They were found with tartan pants. So at very least, the leaders of a lot of these cultures that have now become Middle Eastern appearance or North African appearance, at very least, the leaders of their nations were
something.
Light-skinned people.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it was relatable to power, because like you said, how they revere albinism. It's because they know that the angels, and this isn't racial, this is just, we're just laying this out as biblical and geographical. Like, this is how it is, I mean, when they saw the angels, it always describes them as really white. So I'm assuming that they may think, oh, that person might be more angelic or whatever. If they don't know anything about the Bible, it's probably just startling. I mean, that could be part of it.
This is a controversial take that some people might construe as racist. Now, it says God had a chosen people. Now, people say the chosen people, the Jews. But the word
Jews aren't even the Jews.
Yeah. The word Jews only popped up like in the year 600 or something like that. Prior to that was Hebrews.
Right.
So I have a feeling that Europeans, the light-skinned people, they are God's chosen people. But then you have to go into how could white people from the bloodline of Noah, how could it create all these different races? Well, the human race based on science is a bit of a mongrel breed. Every single race on our planet is a combination of previous hominid peoples. Now, we know that only God can create. And Lucifer, he can manipulate, tweak, and change the things that currently exist. So what would you do if you were trying to play off against God? God had his chosen people, say the Europeans or the lighter-skinned people, and you're like, all right, I'm going to try and corrupt their bloodlines. All right, I've done that. He's done a flood. Well, what do? I can't keep going to God's chosen people. I need my own people. Oh, what's this? I've got a Neanderthal over here. I've got a Denisovan over here. I've got a Homo florensis over in Southeast Asia. I've got all these prototype humans that maybe God created first, practicing to make his perfect creation. I'm going to add a little bit of my special sauce to each of these groups. And is that where the different races sprung out of? Because the racial differences are amazing. So much so that I don't think it could be done out of evolution over such a short period of time. The racial differences, I believe, come from those original hominid peoples. So modern day man, our DNA was mixed with theirs, whether that's interbreeding on a scientific method or they were forcefully mixed through someone who can only change, not create.
Right. Or constant manipulation, because I think the bloodline families that know about this, like the ones that like made the Brotherhood of the Snake and all these like royalty people and all these different brotherhoods, and to like kind of guard these secrets, like what, but why? Like, what are they guarding so much? Why do they all interbreed so much? Why was Egypt like that? They know at some point they've like figured it out. Like, if we keep interbreeding, the kids get really crazy looking and it's not a good thing. And they're not they end up in like mental asylums and whatever. So maybe this is bad. This is a bad plan. They get, hemophilia, all this other stuff going on. So at some point they know, but what do? They still continue. They still continue no matter what. And even when they do bring in someone new, let's take example like Princess Diana. We'll just pretend, because this is just pretend, right? But if they bring someone in, even she was distantly related. They still never go completely out. Actually, Meghan Markle, she's still distantly related. You can trace this stuff. Like, they assume just because she's black that she's not related. Like, get real, people. Like, really. Yeah, it's silly.
And the distantly related thing's quite interesting, because you look at the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, for the better or worse, colonized the world. United Kingdom is responsible for the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. Most of the Western world is all responsible from England. 80+%, I think it's like 85, I'll have to confirm that, 85 or 83% of all Brits, so native Britons, white people, have some kind of connection to royalty. Now, if they have that in Britain, that connection, what do Americans, Australians, Canadians, New Zealanders all have connection to that? So that tells me that's a reinforcement of we all have that bloodline within us.
Yes.
If we have connection to royals.
Yeah. Well, and then on top of it, you want to bring in, the mythology, which, by the way, is called history in other countries. I've been to the Pantheon. It is something. Like, when you go to these places, also, there's like a different feeling. But what were they doing when you start this DNA craze, right? They figure this out and then they're looking for something, right? I feel like they were looking for things, because you get into the gene of Isis, like Genesis, like that's so obvious. Like, come on. Then you get into the God gene, you get into all these genes that they want to say that's completely crazy. Like those are not real, like real things. I mean, the God gene they will admit to, but the gene of Isis, they don't even really. Then there's very few things that you can even find on that. And I'm like, okay, so you guys got this craze and had everybody for the last at least 3 years that I know of, maybe 5, get into, you want to get your ancestry done, ancestry.com, blah, blah, blah. It's huge in Utah. I don't think you could find a person over the age of 22 that hasn't had it done hardly here. Because why? Mormons are obsessed with it. They're obsessed with genealogy. They're a big part of that. And I have my thinkings on why, because of who they worship, and it isn't Jesus. So
And-
I think they spread that, you know.
And what nation state heavily regulates gene history tracking and finding out who your ancestors were and your genetic makeup?
Britain.
Israel. Israel has a
Israel.
very 23andMe, Ancestry.com. That's heavily
I did not know
regulated
that.
within Israel, but they have their own version of it.
Oh.
It's Jewish ancestry, or just something really dumb like
Like
Jew and me.
Off. Oh, really?
Yeah, it's really on the
You and
nose.
me?
On the nose,
Oh,
right? But
that's
they do it.
terrible.
They deliberately have this test, right? At Jewish dating sites or groups. You go up for a dating group and you have to test
wow.
yourself to show if you're a Jew or not. But
What?
the tests you can't access if you're a non-Jew. You can't get it through disclosure programs at all. Because,
Wow, I did not know
like we
that.
said, the modern day Jews are not the Hebrews of
No,
the Testament.
but not the
They're a different group.
Ashkenazi. Yeah,
No,
they're not.
that's what the majority are. It's the Sephardic
People
Jews.
get really upset if you say that.
There's a big schism between current Judaism between the Sephardic Jews and the Ashkenazis because one's an ethnic Jew and one is not. Now, why are they trying to hide the non-ethnic side? Because Jews are supposed to be an ethnic and a religious group. Well, if you're only the religious group side of it, who are your people then? And what's your history of that people?
Yeah, or whatever you are. You could be whatever. Yeah, you're not. Just because you become Jewish doesn't mean, like, if I want to go say I'm African, I'm not. If I move to Africa, I might be African, but I'm not an African that was raised there. Like, I'm not one of their original nations. Like, let's be real. You know, you can say that, but like, everybody knows you're not really that. Like, come on. And they have the ability to hide because it does blend. Like, if it was Africa, we would know, right? Because like you said, it's a strong genetic component. But like theirs, I mean, so brown is pretty dang common. My mom is exactly what you described, and I am the whitest person on the earth. I think I'm whiter than my husband, and he is a ginger. He's got like at least I can tan, but I'm super white naturally, and he has like a little bit of an always tan. He's a little bit darker than me, and I'm like, what in the hell happened with me? Because my parents both have dark hair. My dad had black hair, brown eyes, both of them. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure when I came out, they were just like, whoa. Well, thank heavens I look kind of like my dad. But I'm sure they were wondering because I didn't have as light of hair as I do, but I still have blonde hair. I have dark blonde hair and green eyes, and I'm this color. And if people saw my brother, he when he was alive, he looked Samoan. I mean, he's big, giant, brown guy. And people see my mom and they're like, really? And then I have a natural attraction to redheads. So all my kids are even extra white. Even my brunette is she's one shade lighter on makeup than I am, which is almost impossible to find. So I'm like, I mean, so what happens there? You know, obviously they've done something where this is just popping up recessively now and then. And I'm like you, I'm very into science still. When I look at this stuff, I think science explains a lot of things still. I still go to doctors. I'm a nurse. Like, you're never going to outbreed that of me. You know, like people say, oh, well, you should do this and this if you get sick. I also do the other things. I also believe in more natural things now, but I'm still going to go to the doctor. Like, if I get sick, right? I mean, after a certain point.
Here's the scientific explanation, or one of the theories on why white people look the way they do. We went out of Africa supposedly into Europe. Europe is cold. We constantly had to be covered up. That forced our skin, for whatever reason, to have less melanin because we weren't as exposed to the sun as much. Our noses supposedly became narrower because of the cold air. But then they have the exact same explanation for why Asians look the way they do. The Asian people developed on the steppe where it was very cold. The snow reflected the sun onto their skin, causing them to tan. The sun was so bright, their eyes were forced to become like this.
Ridiculous.
It's so racist, right? But this is the scientific
it's so
theory.
Ridiculous, yeah.
But it's the exact same argument for why white people developed the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Then you look at the idea for why Neanderthals supposedly had a big, broad nose. They needed a big, broad nose because they were running around in the cold of Europe and need to get more oxygen. So if you needed more oxygen, why is ours narrow and small in comparison to other people's? The arguments they use, or the theories, they use for one racial group and they apply it to another, and it's a complete opposite outcome.
Yeah, that's so weird. And I mean, if you look at it from what our standpoint it is, okay, we're still using science. We're not throwing it all out. But if you add the Bible in, what do we know? Noah was super white, but his kids probably were that mixture just like me. I had a bunch of blonde-headed kids, but I have a kid that is dark with brown eyes. I also produced a child. Like, it was kind of funny. Like, I was the opposite, weird adopted. My brother was like, you're adopted all the time. Yeah, and thank God I look like my family, because I probably would have believed it. But he was like, you're adopted, because nobody looks like me. None of them. They're like, my history is like British and Scottish and stuff like that. But so I'm the white part of it. Well, then I have all these white kids, but now I have one dark one. So you just never know when that's going to pop right back up.
And you throw into that, humans selectively breed ourselves. We're attracted to certain traits, and whatever the culture deems attractive at the time, that's what's promoted in the gene pool. We saw like, we take the example was the fallen ones finding human women attractive, and they just took them. Look what happened throughout warfare throughout history. You have the Turkish Huns. The Turkish Huns absolutely loved blonde and redheaded women. So on their raids into Europe, they would take home blonde and redheaded women. That's why we see recessive redheaded and blonde genes within the Turkish people. We see that within the steppe people of Mongolia. You see a lot of redheaded Mongolians. They are still Asian in appearance, but they have a red tinge to them. So whatever we deem as attractive,
Latin people,
yes,
they get. My son's very attracted to, and I think it's that natural thing that you like the opposite of yourself usually. So my son is very blonde, blue eyes. I mean, he just looks like, he looks like me, except for he's a boy, and I have green eyes. And so he likes Latina women. He loves them. I'm certain I will have a Latina daughter-in-law someday, or something like that. Whatever, somebody darker. Okay. And he always says, don't look to me for your ginger grandbabies, because I can't make a ginger. I tried. And so it's a big joke. Whoever gives me the first ginger, I'm going to be like so excited, because, I do. I love them. And so he's like, don't look at me, because I like Latin girls. And I'm like, they still have redheaded babies all the time. I've seen it. It's a darker red, but it's red. I mean, you can tell. And
it's funny.
Like, no.
You see the same thing in Australia. Australia is still, on its whole, very white, and the ethnic air quote groups that came in were the Greeks and the Italians. Still Europeans, slightly more tanned, but you see the same thing. You see the Italian and Greek boys go for blonde-haired girls, and you see the Aussie boys go for the darker tanned Greek and Italian girls. And then you get these mixed generational families where you'll get a random Greek that's bright red hair or a blonde Italian, which they exist, but it's not the very dark Mediterranean Italians that were kind of pushed through cinema.
Yeah. Yep. And then on top of it, we have to go back to, at least for America, I don't know about as a whole everywhere, but I'm sure they would have done this a different way. They just hid it in another way for you guys. And maybe you can tell me, like, for you guys, but like the orphan trains, I am sorry, I am calling the biggest amount of bullshit. They made some kids. I am almost certain that they did genetic manipulation, trying to outbreed that giantism, like trying to make it more to fit in, like we talked about. And they didn't know what to do with all these kids. And I swear that they've done it in the Catholic religion. And here's why I think so. Because they have all those dead baby cemeteries. And I think they're the experiments that didn't go. Like, oops, that one has a alien head, like not that one, don't keep that one, and it's weird because they even say some of them, like, their skulls will be smashed and stuff, and I'm like, that's really, like, that's so strange. And it's not like a little bit of kids. When people say, oh, the orphan trains, it's because their parents died. I'm like, do you know how many kids it was? Because 250,000 children that are all white, no native, no black, no nothing else, only white children, that the Freemasons are running this, all of a sudden are just everywhere. And now it's in every movie. Like, oh, I remember watching movies as a kid and the farm boy was there. Who the hell's the farm boy? Where'd the farm boy come from, right? Like, now I see it and I'm like, oh my, the farm boy. But, and then they mate and get married and all the things. And now they completely integrated our society. And look, it's the whitening of America. I truly believe that, because at the same time they were killing the natives.
At bare minimum, it was child trafficking from Europe so they could replace the native populations.
Some of that too.
Bare minimum.
Sure.
Australia, this this is interesting. I've never really come across the orphan train idea in Australia. Australia, even up until right before Federation, we still had convicts. We had
Right.
the whole Irish slave working class come here. We had the convict system that was in full swing for a long time. So we never got that cultural population boom like the Americas did, because we were still under the yoke of the crown, right? A lot of people went to America because it was free. That was the idea. That's why so many European countries went there. Australia was still very Anglo-Celtic in its demographics, and a lot of that was through slave labor of either the Irish that were brought here or convicts in itself. The orphan train thing's an interesting one, but I don't see a lot of it besides the World's Fair in Australia.
It's such a weird concept. And then on top of it, like right as that's happening with the World's Fair, they've got all these preemie babies. Where are their mothers? Like, and this was over 8,000 kids that he himself saved. That doctor, he was a doctor, Cooney, I think, something like that. I can't remember. But anyway, he was the one responsible for it. He wasn't even a physician. And now we've got all these orphanages and we've got all these orphan kids, and we can't take care of them all. And we're sticking them all everywhere, and we're shipping them off on trains, and we don't even know what to do with them. But let's save every baby that makes it out of the womb early. Like, let's not just let natural selection happen and move on with our lives because, there's too many kids already, right? There's all these kids they don't know what to do with, but we're saving more. That doesn't even make any sense. Like, you don't save the runt of the litter if there's that many. Like, you just don't. And so it kind of makes, and I'm glad they learned it because it's wonderful technology for now, but I think there was more going on there. And then all these wet nurses that went with them. Like, that's weird.
The orphan trains, the whole thing of orphanages that sprung up and they were everywhere, they coincided with asylums.
Yeah.
So who were they filling these asylums with? These the people that saw what was going on and were voicing their concerns against it. Why the hell are you growing babies in tubes? Like back then, if this was the case, how do you stop that from being recorded in history? That person's crazy, lock them up. Give that person a lobotomy. Because lots of people were in asylums at the exact same time as this was going on. So is that just covering up the anti-vaxxers of the day, air quote? Or the
right?
truthers?
That's how I feel. I feel like it was that. Yes, I feel like we'd all be screwed. I feel like all of us.
Well, if they start building asylums again, we're all in trouble because that's where they put us.
Well, and I mean, there's rumors all the time about not asylums, but those camps,
wellness camps. Yeah, we've got 5 in our country.
Like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. Like, what is happening here? But you kind of think like, okay, is this, the reset situation? Then you mentioned like, okay, before that, the whole thing about Great Britain trying to settle everywhere. And whose idea was that? It wasn't a Christian's. It was an occultist's. It was John Dee's. It came from him. And where did he get his information from? He had a direct telephone to the angels. They were fallen angels. They weren't good ones, because I'm certain they weren't, because of some of the stuff they had them do. There's just no way, life swapping, all this other stuff. Like, come on, they weren't the good ones. And I think he was actually an innocent Christian to a point, and then it all became like he basically sold his soul for knowledge at some point, because at some point he knew. I don't think he knew at first, but then at some point, I think he was like, I mean, obviously when he had the wife swapping thing happen, he had to know something wasn't right. I mean, they weren't nice. Those angels were cruel, and he suffered. He never amounted to anything really in his regular life. He had a very similar life to Job. It was kind of sad. Like, almost all his kids died, and plague and all this crazy stuff. And I get it, but like, also he lived for a really long time back then, and that's weird. I'm like, all right. I mean, I think these ideas that spread out came from the same source that runs them. And then they just gave certain ones, like, why do you hear more about Quetzalcoatl, like over in the Aztec area, and you hear more about like Zeus and stuff in Italy? Like, they gave certain people kind of dominion over certain things, and not people, but certain angels, dominion over certain people. And I just think that it makes a lot of sense if you really break it down, and then you get into like, do they take over bodies? Do they, because you see some of these Hollywood people, I mean, you see that video ever of Meghan Markle where she is clearly not home? Like she is checked out and it is terrifying and her eyes are all black. And I'm like, that looks like more than just drugs. I've seen a lot of people on drugs. I'm a nurse.
Who did Meghan Markle marry?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, the ginger. And it's weird.
It's the royal family. The royal family in itself, people will go, oh yeah, they're esoteric, they're lizard people, blah, blah, blah. But there's one that stands out for me that has a lot of occultic type of symbolism and references going on. And that's Elizabeth I, who we know is Henry VIII's daughter. She was a redhead.
And John D was her favorite.
Yeah, she killed her sister, Mary Queen of Scots, to take the throne. At one point in her reign, she called herself the born-again virgin, and she made herself very white with bright red lips. So there's a lot of Nephilim symbolism there. She almost looked like a clown. Bright red hair, big puffy hair, white face, red
balding,
lips.
like she had like this
half balding thing, right?
Yeah, it was so strange.
And apparently,
like,
she bled from the lips a lot during her. She had a health ailment. That's why she would cover it up with red lipstick, because blood would constantly come from it. But what did she do? She consolidated power for the Tudors, for that family line, and from her you got other queens like Queen Victoria, who essentially conquered the world. Helped set up those colonies. So we see that move away from kings into a matriarchy, which we end up seeing in a lot of occultic First Nations types of cultures. It's the female that has the power, that has the control. And as soon as we had two prominent queens within the Anglosphere, they did the most damage. It's almost like they had the majority of power running through their veins than what their previous fathers and grandfathers did.
Well, and they weren't typical. Like, I get it that they're raised a different way, but like Queen Elizabeth, I mean, the way she was even with her husband, the way she was with their kids, like it's all very weird and stoic and strange. And I get that that's how, I mean, I know she was raised a certain kind of way, but also it makes you go back to, okay, part of the Nephilim stuff here, if you want to get into like the personality, you get psychopathy a lot of times, right? You get these people that don't have like normal, like you're like, wait a minute, like that's your kid. Why would you leave your baby at the orphan?
There's no human
whatever. Connection. Yeah, like it's not. Yeah, and it's not the same. It's more reptilian, which is why they get called reptile, right? Like joke. But I mean, and I do think there's different kinds. You know, I think what they were messing with, they messed with in between themselves as well. You know, making who knows what kind of technology they have. I know this. The fallen technology that we have today that makes our phones work, that makes Bluetooth happen, the makeup I put on today so I can have eyebrows, these little things, right? They were junk. They're like junk magic to them. It's like the least of the things. And to us, it's amazing, right?
Well,
and so...
Yeah, the small thing of GMO foods today, like they add scorpion DNA to tomatoes to make them less susceptible to bloat flies and other things like that. Well, that small thing we have today, we've cloned sheep. What could they have potentially had if they were direct from the source? They've got God's knowledge to a certain extent. Well, if I'm a fallen one and I'm propping up my son, a Nephilim, to be a king of a ruling people, and I want him to have some backbone, some power, some authority, I'm going to give him a 3-headed dog that's got a snake for a tail. I'm going to give him griffins to fly around, and I'm going to build dragons. I'm going to create all sorts of monstrous creatures to scare the shit out of his populace to keep him in power as either A, the savior, or the tyrant.
Well, and
you would get bored. If you had all this knowledge, you would get bored. You would get bored if you're an all-powerful being. Humans mean nothing to you. You know what? I'm just going to combine a crab and a buffalo just to see what will happen.
Buffalo, a crabapole. I don't know. My mom always says things because my mom is a very, I'm really analytical, but my mom has a lot of emotions, you know, like, I mean, I have emotions, but I'm not like a girl emotions. I'm more, if I had to explain myself, I'm more like a guy emotion. But I think it's just compartmentalization from being a nurse. So you have to be able to react to certain things and not freak out, and then you fall apart later, right? So anyway, she always tells me, but why would they do that? But what do you mean? Why would they want to kill everyone? And I'm like, Mom, like, do you really think about the ants in your house when you kill them in the summer? Like, you don't think about their family. You don't think about their babies. You just don't want the ants in your house anymore. Well, we're the ants in their house, and she just has the hardest time because she runs on a lot of emotion. And I'm like, it's not like that. They don't think of us like that. We were just here in their way. Like, they made it very clear they never wanted to bow to us, right? Like, they were very specific about that. That's part of the whole reason why a lot of them left, And I told her, I said, you just have to open your eyes and think of it differently. Like, they definitely here among us, if not in us, which I think it's both. I just think some people are literally hybrid. And they've all these genetic tests, they want to joke and say, oh, it's because they made one of you in China. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I think they were looking for something, and some of us have it and some of us don't. Like, do you know, like, a whole bunch of the population has no inner monologue? Like, when I found that out, I was like, what? Because I talk to myself all the time.
Yeah, so do I. Does that make me schizophrenic because I talk to myself on the way to work each day?
Yeah. I was like, oh my gosh. And then I pray so much, and I'm like, that whole God gene, like, I'm constantly in prayer in my mind or whatever. I'm like, what? People don't do this? Like, when I found that out, and it's a large percentage of people. It's like I think 30% or something like that. It's a wild number. And I was like, there's no way. And yeah, it's normal for a lot of people. Don't do that. So I think they found a lot of these things, and they're like, oh, okay, this gene marker, oh, they say some things are junk DNA. No, nothing's junk. This is the shit they don't want to explain. Excuse my language, but
it's
that's
either
true.
there for a reason or it's been placed there as a result of tinkering. It's funny how you mentioned that they didn't want to bow to us, and a lot of people who aren't of the faith wonder why. Well, if God created the angels, why would some of them not want to do what he says? And I put it in the analysis of, think about, you're an employee. You've been working really hard on this big project. You've built this amazing thing with your overseer, your boss. And then he lets a bunch of dumb knuckle draggers walk in and take over.
Right.
It's
and you're like,
it was disgruntled employees. You gave us powers. You made us eternal. You made us almost like you, but you're deciding to give the earth to these monkeys. That's what made them angry. And that's the logical thing. I can understand why.
I was born first. Born first. Like, it's your sibling. Like, they're the sons of renown. Like, what? You're going to let me, this beautiful, because they say Lucifer was a sight to see, that he was beautiful. And I believe it. And he's like, you want me to bow to that thing that you made out of dirt? No, I'm not bowing to the dirt. Like, I helped make the dirt. No,
it makes Lucifer sound like a sassy 16-year-old girl that doesn't like the new kid on the block in the family, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's Mean Girls all over again. Mean Angels. I'm like, what? I get it, but like, also not a good idea. I mean, we get all the repercussions of all this, but I do think they very much are looking for specific things. And I don't think it's going to matter if you didn't do a DNA test or not. You're not safe. Like, let's be real.
No,
like they know things.
And I think the horror that science fiction kind of pre-tells us and puts out into the lexicon so we can discuss it and know about it before it happens is that there might be something special in DNA, the divine spark, or even some of this Nephilim DNA that gives them abilities and powers. Eventually, they're going to be able to recreate a synthetic version of that. And I think that's where we get the idea of super soldiers from. And they're just trying to look for what gave the Nephilim, the Fallen, these powers of the men of renown. And how do we weaponize that? Because there's no doubt in my mind that there's people that have no belief in faith whatsoever, but they believe in the genetics and the DNA of things. Maybe they just believe people in the past had greater abilities and they want to harness that. There's a really concerning thing that happened during COVID, that there's a lab in Australia that was playing around with DNA that was contracted out to an American weapons manufacturer that was in the work of developing super soldiers.
Ooh.
Not super soldiers as in harnessed systems that pulleys and things that could increase their strength. It was DNA based.
Oh my God.
How do we make super soldiers who cannot feel anything?
Ugh.
Give them
extra strength. And then they want to be like a normal person and go out into the world and have babies and
Yeah,
all these things. Yeah.
But as soon as this came out that this group was working in Australia, which country got hit really hard with lockdowns and was shut down very quickly?
Oh wow. I didn't think of that. Huh. Maybe. I'm gonna have to look that up. That's wild. Because I didn't know about that. And I mean, they do tell us things. They've been telling us things for years upon years upon years, right? And including you mentioned the sheep. I don't know if you know about Clonade. Have you looked into Clonade a lot? They said they did this. I watched, this is crazy because it was actually Australian 60 Minutes that I saw this on. But it was a 2003 press conference on CNN first, where the lady came out that runs it with that weird Real, whatever, with, I don't know his first name, but it's Real at the last one. And so like real, spelled like real. And they said, oh, we successfully cloned a girl. They named her Eve. And so that happened in 2003. And then I saw this 60 Minutes in Australia, and it was like 2016 or 15. And they're like, oh, we're going to clone the first human. And I'm like, wait, I've seen this before. Like, that's why I went backward. I was like, wait, I've seen this lady before. Like, and so I searched her name, and that article, that thing came up, and I'm like, I saw this a long time ago. And they said they already did it. And they said she lives in the Middle East. And I believe it. They've done this. I think they've been doing it. I think it's been going on for a long time, which, I mean, that's more of a direct instead of like a contamination, right? Like, like an accidental.
That's engineering something instead of it just happening naturally through procreation and just tracing down family lines.
And so that's a big concentrated dose,
It is. Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, that's kind of the idea of, have you seen, there's a film that came out recently. Oh, it escapes me. I'm really, really sorry. It's a film about a satanic group stealing the Shroud of Turin. They take Jesus' DNA and they create a clone, and they need a human clone with God's essence to be a vessel for the devil to release him from hell.
Oh, wow.
And this group, these elites, they get all their money by cloning famous world people like Michelangelo, Da Vinci. They take their DNA and they make perfect clones for their wealthy and the elite. At the start of it, there's an 8-year-old boy and he's playing Mozart's symphony perfectly. And it's Mozart's clone. And this family paid 25 billion euro for this child.
Wow.
And this group that has that as a front, air quotes, for the shady elites, they're the ones that clone a Jesus vessel for the Antichrist.
I wouldn't doubt it. It makes you nervous. Like, you hear about all these things, and then like there's a famous rapper that came out and said he is one. He is a clone. He had like a shirt and everything. He was trying to show it. Something. But it was really weird. And I mean, he like completely says he's like a 3rd or 4th generation clone. And is that why they don't age? Is that why they're not afraid of death? Is that why they don't care? Like, at some level, you have to kind of wonder, like, is this what's going on?
And people think it's a science fiction idea of what a clone is. They think a clone is an exact duplicate of someone. They're genetically identical. So there can be variations in appearance. It'll be very similar, just like a sibling would be. So when we see films like The Island, where they had clones of celebrities so they could have organs and backup parts if they needed it, is that what kind of happens in the conspiracy theory realm, where you see a celebrity falls sick and then they come back and some of their appearance is slightly different. Off, like the webbing of their ear is connected all of a sudden, or their nose is slightly different. Is this what's happening? Are they just swapping out clones because someone's actually died or someone needed a new heart, or...
They'll just keep them going until, and why do they look so young for like a long period of time? Some of them are
age overnight.
Not good. I mean, granted, like Madonna doesn't look like she didn't age. It looks really weird and plasticky, and like you can tell. But
did you ever think we'd live in a world? Do you ever think we'd live in a world where Madonna is less attractive than Roseanne Barr?
Oh my gosh. Did you see her side view of her butt? I don't know what's going on in her pants, but it is so weird. It's like doesn't move. My son pointed it out and I laughed so bad. I'd leave it to a 16-year-old, right? He was like, look at her side view. And it like just is like almost like a bolted on bottom. It was so funny. I was like, no, you're right. It doesn't move. Oh,
Trust the 16-year-old boy who likes Latin
yes,
girls to know if a
yes,
button doesn't
exactly.
move.
Yep.
It's used to them moving around.
And then I have one other rando question for you. What about your thoughts on Zachariah Sitchin? Speaking of them telling us things.
I'm a person who came from the UFO camp. I started off reading books about like Nessie and Bigfoot, and then as an 8-year-old read The Day After Roswell. And up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was heavily in the alien camp. It's aliens, they're out there, the government's hiding it up. But I was so focused on aliens being it that it blinded me to the rest of the information that was going on. I think Zachariah Sitchin, he tells a lot of truths, but gives away a lot of mistruths. He does have a lot of errors in his translations, which a lot of people don't like to admit. But the basic template and the premise of the story he's telling is pretty accurate for the most part. You omit the thing that aliens came and intervened, and you just go back to it's a spiritual entity or a fallen type of thing. It makes more sense. It actually lines up with scripture. It lines up with other cultures around the world. The alien thing seems like it's his little cherry on top that differentiated him from the rest of the world. And I think that's what gave a lot of credence to the ancient alien movement. It was Zachariah Sitchin, then Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. That gave birth to the ancient aliens movement. And really, it made the alien disclosure movement legitimate for the majority of the population. I think it's over 80% of Americans believe in UFOs now.
Well, and it's really stupid that we can believe, okay, anything they give to us, like phones, any knowledge that they give to you, like Facebook, okay, it all started from them messing with something for like 20 or 30 years or better. Like they've known this stuff for a long time. And then eventually they're like, nah, give it to the peasants, like make them smile, let them get a new iPhone, like all these dumb things, right? And so I think that they all are underground at this point. I think that if you've ever seen underground mines, there's like multiple videos of mines where they can drive through, and it's like cities under there. And I have an uncle that was a top Green Beret. He was in charge of he was in the special forces. He was airborne. He was like one of the top people that he would go with these diplomats or different things to like protect them when they're here. And he's like, absolutely, the dumbs are real. He wouldn't necessarily discuss with me what is down there, because that's like, there's certain things he cannot say, even still. He's retired, but he's like, you can say things to me and I can say, but he has told me, he's given me a lot of hmms on things. And he didn't say they were necessarily demons, but I know that there are things that live beneath us. And why is there cities underneath almost everywhere that we live? Like, I don't know about in Australia, but in America, that's a thing. Like there's a city underneath every city.
Melbourne's like that. Too? There's older Melbourne, air quotes below Melbourne, and you can look at some of the older buildings in the city centre, and you get the stereotypical mud flood stuff where there's windows that are halfway up of a sidewalk, type of thing.
Yeah.
What you're talking about with like these dumbs, I think this is the biggest issue in the truther community at the moment, is that we latch onto an idea or a story, and it might have 5% truth, 95% bullshit. And unfortunately, it's the 95% bullshit which discredits the whole movement. There's no doubt in my mind, as an ex-military person myself, that there are underground military bases. They exist. There would be definitely underground government bases to exist, just to have the succession of government in the case of a natural disaster or a war. Those exist. The problem is when you get prominent members come out, like there's quite a few very big Australian podcasters that try to say that there's underground bases under Melbourne, and every time we've had an earthquake, which isn't normal for our part of Australia, we're not on a plate, that this is the dumbs being attacked and it's the aliens being fought, and they saved 3.5 million children. But, you go through it logically, 3.5 million extra children in our state that only has a population of 6.5, we would notice a doubling overnight.
Yeah, what are we going to do with these kids, right?
But at the same time, I understand that Victoria's been going through a big build project at the moment that's blown out to like $178 billion. where they're tunneling. They're building tunnels for roads and infrastructure. Well, if you're doing that, what's to stop them at the same time from having a secret building underneath that or a few tunnels that go off to the side? Like we know that happened with the Denver airport. So what's stopping it from happening now?
For sure. Well, and the thing is honestly, like, okay, to those people that you're talking about, I don't know their stories on their podcast, but I'm going to say this. If there's fallen angels working with you, whether they're in a human body or not, you're not keeping them captive. Like, let's get real. Like, come on, they're there because they want to be. And if you want to, what happened to the Aztecs? And all of a sudden one day, all these people were just gone. That was a lot of people. Like, come on, let's be real. I don't think you can just disappear them or make them, they don't bend to us. No. They're angelic for a reason. They didn't bend to us then, and they're not going to start now. So I can tell you what, nobody's being kept against their will. You know, that's just...
If anything, the things that these black ops groups are going around and capturing are probably the things they've created that they're just letting loose. It's like letting a wolf go in a national park.
We saved them. Oh, good. Let's go adopt them out to the family so they can all grow up and be crazy psychopaths because they're more than half Nephilim, you know, like not just like a little bit and it's all diluted. Because, I mean, I think at some point they had to see like, oh, okay, if there's less than half in this person, they're not as easy to, you know, murder or do these bad things, or their conscience comes back, or their God gene is there, or whatever they're studying to figure out like, oh, we don't want that one that talks to herself all day in her brain. Like, you know, go find a different egg donor. I mean, like really, these things matter to them. It sounds funny to us, but it does matter when you're talking about like, okay, Hitler tried to do this on a natural level, right? Like on a, I'm just going to select it by like, oh, you have blonde hair. Oh, you can come. Like, not you, like you though. And it didn't work on a lot of levels because people still were people inside. Like not everybody bent, not everybody did what he said. There were many people that died right along, you know, and I just think it wouldn't work any other way. It would have to be bred in. It would have to be because at some point, somebody, even the most killer of all killers, if you still have humanity inside you, like at some point, all the people in prison convert before they die. Why does that happen? Because the conscious is there if you have a safe place to like let it happen. But if they're in these horrible situations or they're just allowed to continue to be like in their evil, you know, if they're happy doing that, then it blocks it out. If you keep killing people and you're happy doing that, you're probably not going to focus on anything else, you know, because adrenaline, right? But if you're put to a stop, that's why people say, oh, it's all fake. They come to Jesus because it's fake in the end. I'm like, I don't think so. I think they're forced to stop. I think they have to sit and be quiet and they learn. Like,
it's the atheist argument, isn't it? Why would God allow someone like Jeffrey Dahmer to be saved just because he repented and found God at the end? Well, that is what God gave us. God gave us all the ability to be saved, regardless of what your sins were. As humans, we can find that disgusting and we can struggle with that, but that's not up to us. And that's where that level of faith comes into it. And I don't think atheists can fully grasp that because they don't have an understanding of faith. They don't have any themselves.
Well, and they don't have a concept, not just atheism, but like Mormonism or a lot of other religions that I've been involved or around. Grace is not fully understood. And why does the Bible say, why does God say, you don't think as I think? So don't try to think for me, right? Like you do what I say because I don't think like you. He literally puts it out there like, don't try and figure me 100% out because it's not going to work. I'm God and you're you and I'm me and I'm you and we're different. Just like we really don't know what our dog thinks all day.
Well, how can
we don't, you know,
how can we ever try to understand an omnipresent being? Something that's everywhere at once through all time, all of the universe potentially, everywhere at once, controls everything, knows what everything's doing, knows what's going to happen. How can we ever possibly try to understand that? We are mortal for a reason. We can't possibly comprehend the immortal because we aren't. No.
And when you start to do that, now you've crossed a fine line even if it's for good, this is something New York Patriot told me. Even if you're doing something for good and you're pushing intention and you're like trying to put your will into it, like my mom's sick and I want her better, so I'm going to manifest blah, blah, blah. He said, even if it's for good, now you've crossed the line to occultism because you have now made it about yourself and what you want and not what God wants anymore. This is about you now. And because if it was her time, you just robbed her of that. If it was this or that, you've just messed up the plan. Like maybe something was supposed to be a certain kind of way. And that is why God gets so upset with humans all the time, because we're always trying to meddle. And the angels, he's upset with them too. But we're always trying to meddle in what he's already done. Like it's very simple, right?
Yeah, you'd have to define then what's the difference between manifestation and prayer then, wouldn't you? Because prayer, you're asking for something, you're not trying to force it to happen. Whereas I think manifestation's a very new agey, occultic type of thing. And you see it a lot in like even
Christians
just
do it. The Christian movement is about it. Some of these new agey ones.
I see a lot of in TikTokers. You see TikTokers go, "Oh, I'm manifesting this new job promotion. Yeah, it's going to happen." I think it's a really weird approach to it where I think, and not to put down New York Patriot, but I think there's definitely a difference between prayer and manifestation. Is that prayer you're asking for it, you're not demanding it, and it's selfless because it is through the lens of something good. You're looking out for your loved one, you're wanting them to become better, and you're asking God if he could do that. You're not telling him to. It's
that's what he was saying, not with prayer, with manifestation solely. That you're kind of not, you don't just ask like nice, like you're not saying if it is. I always say when I pray for that kind of stuff, if it's your will, even when it's super hard, like I've had cancer, like I've been there on the other end of that stick where I'm like, oh, is this the day today? Like, is this my time? Like, I'm kind of early, but that's all right, I guess. And you're scared. You want to do what you can to, like, I want to be saved. I got all these kids and stuff. Like, I don't want to go anywhere yet. Like, I was 37, and actually I was 35. And so it was scary, but at the same time, I was like, well, okay, but God knows what he's doing with me. So it's okay. And that's where the difference is, right? He was saying like when people pray, a lot of times it's more like that. But when people do that manifesting, it's more like, this is what, because they say you can't just ask. It's like, you want to make sure you don't just manifest a car. You see what kind of car it is and you put yourself in it and you're already driving it and you're making it happen because it's going to happen. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds not the same, like, there's no room there for God to come in then and help you. Because what if that's not supposed to be your car? What if you're going to get killed in a car accident next week if you buy that car? We don't know. He does know. That's the whole point.
Yeah, you get into a weird idea of what fate and what divine path and everything is like then. And I think there's an issue that a lot of people who tend to lose their faith, it's often around a lot of loss, personal loss.
Yeah.
And the first thing they'll say is, I spent my whole life praying to God and he did nothing for me. Well, maybe that wasn't supposed to happen. Yeah. And it is a very hard pill to swallow, but I think far too often a lot of people, and I think it's a lot of people who are brought up in multi-generation Christian houses, they almost see prayer as being like Siri or Amazon Lexus, play this song. Jesus, give me prosperity. It's almost what I think that a lot of people determine prayer to be. Prayer is acknowledging that God's existence is there and asking things of him, which may not come to eventuate.
Yep. And when we do that, we have to remember, I always put myself when I was in that position and multiple things in my life, because I've lost so many people. I had so many things like that I always go back to Job, because I always think, God, if I'm supposed to suffer right now, then help me suffer well, because nobody wants to. Nobody wants to go through that.
No. And this is the thing I actively try to do as a new Christian is I try not to ask for things. I thank him for what I've got and the ability to say, it's not manifesting. If I really want to say, lose 20 kilos, I'll say, God, thank you for the situation I'm currently in. I thank you for all the blessings you've given to me. I'm trying really hard to lose a little bit of this weight. Give me the strength to do so. Please give me the strength. If he doesn't give it to me, that's fine. But I'm not, I'm deliberately not trying to say, God, make me lose 5 kilos. Make it happen. It's not like rubbing a Buddha's tummy.
No. And on top of it, like anytime you go back to force, this is the thing. What was the one thing that Lucifer wanted to do with us? He wanted to force, right?
Yeah.
He wanted us to be forced to do the things we were supposed to do. And he couldn't figure out why God would let us mess it up. Like, why would you do that? We could just make them do this way, and then it will be fine. And then I'm like, yeah, but then nobody ever learns anything. Because if you try to color for your child every single time they sit down to color, and trust me, this is hard for me because I have bad OCD. Okay. So
You went outside
you
the
have,
line.
oh, yeah, I'm like, oh gosh. And well, you want to help them. Oh no, let me show you to make it perfect. Well, maybe it's not supposed to be, you got to learn to love whatever it is, because some people are different and they might see a different line than you. Maybe they think, oh, that's great. I went outside the line and made a different creature, and now this is amazing. And my brain doesn't, I'm very analytical, and that doesn't occur with me. I don't make a pink dinosaur. It's not going to happen, well, we won't go into that. But
Would you consider
a dinosaur?
Would you then, it's just a thought that popped in my head, would you consider manifesting the lazy person's version of goal setting? Because you don't
Maybe.
necessarily need God to achieve a goal, because you've got the power to make change in your own life.
That's funny. It's very all about that whole positive, like the Christians that are really into like positivity, all positivity, no negative. We don't tolerate negative. We just think the best things. We're going to make the best things happen. We're going to make it happen. I'm like, okay, where's your faith? Where is your faith now? If God is going to make it happen because you said so, that doesn't tell me that you really know what you're dealing with, because you're not looking at faith. Like even Job, like at the end, a lot of people skip and say, okay, Job got everything back and happily ever after, right? Not necessarily. Job lost all his children at once. A building fell on him. He did have more children. He did get another wife. But here's the thing. As a mother, those children are not the same. That is not the same child, no matter what. Not even as a clone like you. I think it would have little subtle differences, right? Like little tiny things. Even identical twins are not exactly the same. They're often very different inside personalities. So he lost permanently. And I know in heaven he will regain, but like he had to live with that. And people often skip that pain. When you're a Christian, pain will bring you peace. I know that sounds awful. Like, I know that, but like the best times in my life that I've been closest to God are the hardest times of my life. Like, you don't learn anything if you're just having easy all the time. And I'm not like, if you've had an easy life, that's good too. But I'm just saying, like, at some point, everyone's struggled, right? Like, it doesn't have to be cancer. It doesn't have to be whatever. It could be small things, I don't know. That's just me. I feel like people skip on that faith,
They do. And I think, like you mentioned before with the car, manifesting the car, that's the very materialistic kind of thing that people try to manifest. And even through prayer, you do see and hear of that. But what's to say that God hasn't given you the opportunities and the blessings that you can do that yourself? I'm manifesting, I want a red sports car. Well, God's put the things in place for that. He has the dealership, the person who invented the car, the person who built the car, the person who paints the car, put all these pieces together.
Right.
You've just got to work hard and save the money for it.
Yep.
It's a very small thing you can do. You don't just ask for it. Yeah,
he's given us everything we need, not everything we want. Mm-hmm. And I go back with that to celebrities. A lot of these celebrities, they have everything. And look how many kill themselves. Look how many just destroy themselves on drugs. Look how many just are miserable that are alive. Like how many times they've been married, how many losses have they had, how many things have just been horrible for them. And it could be a Faustian bargain deal, but also like, I think at the end of the day, it's because you went outside of what was really meant for you if you did make that bargain, right? Now you have everything and you're still not happy. Same for the occult people. Like I've met very few, if ever, people that are like come across as super freaking happy about that. Like they seem pretty pissed off most of the time, I mean, that's just what I've seen, but that I just think that if you are given too much, you therefore do not want to work. You don't want to. It's the same thing with kids. Why do we give kids chores that we have to redo, right? Like especially me. I'm definitely redoing that. Like, and the kids joke now. My older kids, I have really older kids, like 28, clear down to 10. And some of them are like, why does mom make us clean the kitchen anyway? She's going to redo it. And I'm like, because it's the point. It's the point of the thing. You need to help your family. And so, and I've backed off a lot. As I've had more children, it gets less and less. Like the OCD becomes way muted under that. So that's good. Maybe that's why I was supposed to have 6.
That's where you push the idea of tidying up versus cleaning. You get them to tidy up so
Yes.
that you can actually clean.
Yep, I agree. So anything else I missed on the Nephilim? I thought this went really good.
No, this was good. I will mention that I have a listener who's a gentleman from North Queensland who is he's half Aboriginal. He's of Mob. He sent me a very, very horrifying image of what's considered to be a yowie.
Oh,
I'm having talks with him. Hopefully, I'm going to get him on the show. But I'm looking for permission to share the image because by far it is the best image of what I would consider to be a yowie. But you look at it, it gives you a very dark, uneasy feeling. Something that I've never had looking at, say, pictures of the Paddy Gimlin film and stuff like that. So as soon as I can get the okay from him to share it, I'll shoot that through to you, Heidi.
Ooh,
So get
wow,
your
that's
opinion on it as
amazing.
well.
Ooh, yeah, I'd love that. That sounds wild. Is that what they call them then? As a
Yowies, yeah.
Nephilim?
Our Bigfoot is a yowie.
Oh, Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Is it it's like, is it hairy? Does it look like?
But very, very dark. Very dark.
I do think there's many things that enter through those portals. They used to have all those like gates, like gateways. You know what I'm talking about? And they started just disappearing, which I think is so weird. Like, I mean, if they mean nothing and we're all super cuckoo and we're just like down the rabbit hole, why not just leave them there? Right? That's so weird to me. And I bet you as they got better with technology, they're still there, but it's like a hidden technology now. I don't know.
Well, that's where
I don't doubt it.
Come into it. Like things exist around us on a 5th dimension we can't perceive
Mm-hmm.
because we're not in it.
Yeah, it's so weird. And it's so weird that they would want to come here sometimes just to be like, haha, like I'm going to go mess with the humans today.
Well, maybe it's like us. Maybe it's like us going to the zoo.
Right,
Oh,
that's true.
The meerkats are doing. Oh, look, the humans. They're at the. Look at those humans are doing. They're shopping. That's just so quaint.
That's such a silly thing. Yeah, no kidding. Well, tell everyone where we can find you so that they know.
Yeah, sure.
I know where to find you, but they might not.
Drew Missen from your Missing the Point podcast. It's spelt MISSEN. You can find me on all the usual podcatchers. I'm on Twitter and Instagram as my socials, and you can email me at drewmissen88@gmail.com.
Amazing. Well, I think this was great, and I can't wait for tomorrow as well. So I'll be seeing you again soon. Yes. Christian Coalition. We're going to be going after that one tomorrow.
Definitely.
Or whenever it airs. I'm sure it might air at a different time. But all right. Thanks again, Drew.
Thank you,
I hope
Heidi.
you have a good day. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.